2024 is widely considered to be the culmination of the golden age for Metroidvania games, with the year having seen the release of numerous titles in the genre, including some long-awaited ones, several of which are hailed as cream of the crop material, having pushed boundaries and implemented mechanics in ways that are now considered benchmarks expected from new entries in the Metroidvania arena. As the year draws to an end, I figured it would be great to pay tribute to the titles that stood out from the crowd in varying degrees by presenting to you the 18 Metroidvanias that marked 2024 as the pinnacle for the genre. The following list includes games that range from having been well received by the community to having earned critical acclaim that makes them Game of the Year contenders. I also wish to clarify that while there are some games in this list that I have not played as of now, I have done comprehensive research for the titles I haven't personally experienced to ensure their quality based on credible player feedback and gameplay footage. And now, without further ado, let's dive into it. Nine Souls is considered by many to be the absolute best Metroidvania Souls-like game to have ever been created, with its omission from the 2024 Game Awards having caused quite the controversy due to the title's quality. It was one of those games people had been waiting on for years, so the excitement of the community once they learned that May of 2024 would be the month to finally experience it was understandable. Though it did have a few issues at launch, with the most notable ones being a couple of hardlock situations players could experience, the developers were quick to address complaints, catapulting Nine Souls to a 95% overwhelmingly positive Steam review rating from more than currently 18,000 players. Nine Souls won over the hearts of gamers with its deep story and lore, beautiful visuals, challenging parry-based tactical combat, and dementedly difficult bosses that gave you the ultimate sense of achievement once beaten, making it not only one of the best Metroidvanias of 2024, but one of the best games ever made. When I think of the term underdog, I can't consider a game more fitting for this distinction than Animal Well, a title that didn't look that impressive in trailers but caught everyone by surprise once it released back in May of 2024. While it was initially hard to understand whether the game's reception was genuinely good or not, given the large number of what looked like meme Steam reviews, the game's quality became evident after the first week once the dust had settled, with gamers hailing it as a masterpiece of puzzle solving and atmospheric ambience. What immediately set Animal Well apart from the crowd was its complete lack of combat, with the game focusing solely on mental gymnastics for the player to figure out how to solve conundrums in order to survive and advance in a hostile ecosystem. With a massive world packed full of secrets and a lot of post-game content to boot, Animal Well became beloved by players all around the world and earned itself a 96% Steam rating from more than 16,000 reviews, placing it on par in reception with Nine Souls, an incredibly admirable feat considering that it was created by a solo developer, a YouTuber called Billy Basso. Back in June of 2023, when Ubisoft announced the new Prince of Persia game, no one was truly impressed by the first trailer of the title, which demonstrated a side-scrolling platformer with an unknown protagonist. As time passed, however, interest in the title increased when information about it being a Metroidvania became known, along with some very positive first impressions by players that had experienced it. It wasn't until January of 2024 that we would finally get to play the game, titled Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, and get our minds fully blown by its quality. From its wonderful visuals to its solid combat all the way to its phenomenally fluid and challenging platforming, which has always been a staple of the series, The Lost Crown quickly proved that it was much more than a half-baked attempt to revive the IP by presenting solid gameplay paired with an interesting story and one of the most likable protagonists in the genre. Adding to that the wealth of accessibility options and large amount of optional content present, The Lost Crown immediately became a Game of the Year contender and a worthwhile entry in the legendary series. Unfortunately, despite its critically acclaimed reception, it wasn't considered financially successful enough to warrant a sequel, with the final nail in the coffin being the disbanding of the developer studio in October of 2024. Regardless, the fact that this game was even created is still a huge win for gamers everywhere, and I will always be thankful for it. If there has ever been a game for which you know the developers hold lots of love, that's the Mobius Machine, one of the most fun science fiction Metroidvanias I have ever played. Aside from the fact that its creators have added a ton of content to it ever since its initial release back in March of 2024, which has made the game even lengthier and more impressive, it also features one of the most entertainingly interconnected maps I have ever traversed, including some instances of non-linearity. From its low ambient music to its mostly fun boss fights and entertaining twin-stick combat, all the way to its vast exploration and novel traversal abilities, the Mobius Machine was one to look out for straight from the get-go, and is now even more worthwhile with its many quality of life improvements and added content over the past several months, such as new bosses and various gameplay revamps, which have made the game's reception increasingly favorable. I'll admit the story felt more like an afterthought and the biomes looked quite repetitive after a while, but I still had a ton of fun with this one. As someone who loves 90s cartoons, BioGun immediately caught my eye when I first saw it about a year and a half ago, but it wasn't until I went hands-on with it during a preview and later played it on release that I truly understood how special it was. BioGun's vibrant visuals flesh out a unique biological world inside a sick dog, making each biome an amazing delight to investigate. Visuals are not all the game has going for it though, since its shooting is incredibly satisfying, its exploration very much worthwhile, and its music simply sublime. Granted, there are those who consider some of the bosses to be very tough, and there have been some complaints in relation to technical performance issues from players which the developers are always working on addressing, but the 90% Steam rating from nearly 400 reviews speaks for itself. BioGun is one of the most unique and fun Metroidvanias to come out this year, and definitely one to keep in mind when looking for your next engaging adventure. When the community learned that the developer behind the incredibly well-received Metroidvania Vision Soft Reset was making another Metroidvania game called Moonlight Pulse, it was natural for both excitement and expectations to be quite high. After experiencing Moonlight Pulse, I was glad to discover that said expectations were met and even surpassed in a few unexpected areas. Moonlight Pulse is one of the games in the genre to allow instant swapping between 4 different characters once each has joined your party, which made for a very creative approach in both combat and exploration. This is also the second game in this list to be taking place inside a living organism, namely a giant spacefaring turtle, which I found quite amusing. However, what truly caught me off guard here was the actual story of Moonlight Pulse, which went to some unexpectedly dark places that kind of contradicted the cuteness of its main characters, something that I thoroughly enjoyed. Boasting solid gameplay on top of beautifully rendered pixel art graphics, Moonlight Pulse is a short and sweet Metroidvania experience worth having. As someone who thoroughly enjoys challenging platforming, I was beyond excited to learn that Bo, Path of the Teal Lotus, was largely focusing on that aspect of gameplay, and after finally getting to try it out this summer, I was pleased to see that the rumors were true. Bo has some of the most difficult acrobatic segments I have ever experienced in the genre, especially during the last third of the game, some of which required surgical precision and snappy reflexes to overcome, giving you an immense sense of accomplishment once you beat them. There were also a few bosses that gave me a run for my money, a challenge that I'm always willing to rise toward. In addition, the game offered some accessibility options if the difficulty became too much for the player, in the form of invincibility for those hard platforming sections that drove you mad. That being said, the developers did lower the overall difficulty eventually via patches to make it even more accessible based on player feedback. Regardless of that, Bo, Path of the Teal Lotus remains one of the highlights of the year and a Metroidvania worthy of a place in your game library. Those who know me are aware that I'm a huge fan of a good story, so it was only natural that a narrative-heavy Metroidvania like Gestalt, Steam and Cinder would immediately catch my attention. This was another one of those games that people had been waiting on for a long time before we finally got confirmation of its 2024 release. I'll start by saying that the narrative aspect of the title was quite divisive, with some people thoroughly enjoying it while others feeling it weighed down the game, though everyone universally agreed that the ending was very much below expectations. That being said, another thing people agreed on was how beautiful and technically proficient Gestalt was, with silky smooth gameplay and ridiculously detailed visuals fleshing out a fantastic steampunk world that was ripe for exploration. I was among the players that fell deeply in love with its setting, lore and story, and thoroughly enjoyed its combat and exploration, though the latter had a good chunk of linearity in it for sure. The one thing that left a sour taste in my mouth was how incredibly easy the game became as you progressed, to the point where you eventually became near immortal and obliterated bosses like they were minions. Despite that, I think everyone should give Gestalt, Steam and Cinder a chance, and if you're not one for heavy exposition dumps, you can always rush through dialogue by mashing the forward button. Biomorph is another game in this list that a lot of people consider to be what they call S tier, and frequently mentioned along Nine Souls as one of the top Metroidvanias of the year, even though it hasn't received as much attention as the juggernaut from Red Candle Games. The novelty that immediately drew the love of players was the ability to acquire and morph into different forms during your playthrough, which offered new abilities in terms of combat and exploration, effectively introducing the title's ability gating element. There were some complaints about the number of forms available being overwhelming in relation to the limited usefulness many of them had, though here there was also the positive counterpoint of the wealth of customizations you could create when considering forms alongside equipment you could discover, allowing you to tailor gameplay to your own tastes. Biomorph is one I plan to tackle early next year alongside Nine Souls and Animal Well, and if its 92% Steam rating based on more than 400 reviews is any indication, I expect to have a jolly good time with it. Many people consider that the Zelda-like and Metroidvania genres are not a good fit for one another, but there were two games that came out this year which completely negated that belief, and the first one was Minishoot Adventures. Minishoot Adventures was immediately embraced by the community and received overwhelming acclaim upon release, with gamers loving the Zelda-like approach to traversal with the Metroidvania element in exploration, both of which were topped off by a hectic yet fun bullet hell combat system. The one thing that didn't win many people over were the occasional cage fights the game forced you into, where you had to clear groups of enemies before you were allowed to continue, though this was by no means considered that detrimental to the experience when taking into account the overall quality of the game. If you're looking for one Zelda-like Metroidvania to play, this is one of your best bets, though the next game on this list is not one to take lightly either. Crypt Custodian was the second major Zelda-like Metroidvania release of 2024, and this one's quite special since it's the latest brainchild of Kyle Thompson, the creative force behind two of the best Metroidvanias of recent years, namely Shippo and Islets. It's hard to describe how easy it is to pick up Crypt Custodian and get lost inside its world unless you experience it yourself, but this was one of the most simultaneously novel and nostalgic experiences I had the pleasure of engaging with. From a world packed full of secrets to a cozy yet emotional story vibe, all the way to some challenging boss fights, Crypt Custodian is bound to stick with you and pull you into its whimsical world if you decide to give it a chance, as proven by its 98% Steam rating resulting from more than 1,100 reviews. In short, you can't go wrong with this one. When the indie film Turbo Kid came out in 2015, chances are its creators hadn't foreseen that their over-the-top post-apocalyptic movie would go on to become one of the best gems in the Metroidvania genre 9 years later, but here we are. Turbo Kid won people over with its gritty visual ambience and blood-soaked gameplay immediately, with special mention going to your bicycle as a mode of transportation necessary to traverse parts of the world without feeling overly oppressive in its use and easy to pick up and drop off to go about exploring. Its excessive gore was the cherry on the cake of the game's B-movie vibe and, along with last year's Laika Aged Through Blood, made Turbo Kid one of the best post-apocalyptic titles in the genre when paired with its solid gameplay. This is one of those titles that deserves more attention than it has received, so do consider giving it a chance. It may end up surprising you in the most pleasant of ways. This entry in the list is definitely quite divisive since there was a good portion of people that found this game lacking, but I do believe Venture to the Vile deserves a spot on the best Metroidvania games of the year list on account of the amount of care shown to it by its developers post-launch. I was one of the people that immediately fell in love with the game's setting and vibe, which felt like a mix of Tim Burton's and Wes Anderson's work when it came to visual approach and whimsical world building. That being said, I was also among the first to admit that there were certain technical issues that held the game back, such as a lack of performance efficiency that led to FPS drops, certain achievements not popping, and also some gameplay related grievances such as a lack of ways to mark or even track collectibles on the map overview, a map overview that many people found to be quite problematic in terms of design as well, though I was not one of them in that regard and found the basic map design to be fitting to the setting. That being said, the developer spent a lot of time addressing these issues, with their most massive patch actually having released this past November with further optimizations. So if there ever was a time to give Venture to the Vile a try, this is probably it. It's not often that you come across a good 3D Metroidvania, let alone a first-person one, but Frogmonster is definitely proof that such games exist. Developed by a single person, Frogmonster gained a lot of attention and praise because of its intricately structured and incredibly challenging boss battles, with each big bad being a puzzle of their own in terms of how to approach their defeat. Its Metroidvania elements are fairly limited, though definitely present, since backtracking after acquiring new abilities is necessary for 100% completion, and outside of boss battles the game loses some of its luster, though is still considered fun, but it is your bouts against its various villains that distinguishes this small gem from the rest of the crowd. Thus, if you're ready to face some of the toughest and most creatively designed boss encounters in the Metroidvania genre, do give Frogmonster a shot and prepare to perish frequently until you conquer each one of them. It's no secret that Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight is considered to be one of the best games in the Metroidvania genre, so when the latest Momodora game released back at the start of 2024, titled Momodora Moonlit Farewell, fans rushed to try it out and thankfully discovered that it delivered the quality expected based on its predecessor's success. That being said, fans also reported it didn't really do anything new when compared to said predecessor, but provided the same high quality of gameplay the previous game in the series became known for, albeit with more crisp and detailed visuals, which is definitely a win. As someone who has played Reverie Under the Moonlight but not this one, I believe this favorable comparison bodes well for Moonlit Farewell, a belief that is enforced by its 92% Steam rating from more than 2,300 reviews, making it a safe bet to have a good Metroidvania time. Did you ever wonder what would happen if you combined the moody ambience of Hollow Knight with the incredibly oppressive sense of dread that comes from the cosmic horror genre? Well, developer Powersnake did, and then breathed unholy life into Voidwrought, which I personally consider to be one of the best Metroidvanias ever, though definitely held back by a few less than ideal choices in game design. Voidwrought was one of the few Metroidvanias I played in 2024 that can be considered near truly non-linear, allowing you to explore its world largely based on your own choice after the initial couple of hours, a world packed to the brim with a significant number of secrets and collectibles. Now, while I truly loved my time with the game, the two main issues I had with it were the following. First, it became progressively way too easy when I experienced it, which kind of made me lose my sense of urgency when dealing with enemies, especially of the boss variety. Second, it was incredibly hard to keep track of every secret in its world, since many of them were obscurely concealed within the environment, making 100% completion a daunting task. Granted, the developers have released several patches since then to address the main concerns voiced by players, so do keep that in mind as well. Voidwrought is a personal favorite despite its issues, and I'm truly hoping for a sequel down the line. As mentioned in a previous entry, I'm a huge fan of challenging platforming, and aside from Bow, Path of the Teal, Lotus, there was another game that humbled me in that regard, and that was Aestik, a Metroidvania game that hides a brutal set of acrobatic challenges beneath a cute and cozy visual presentation. Aestik starts slow with some basic platforming and serviceable combat, before thrusting you into some insanely painful gauntlets that require every ounce of your focus in order to make it to the other end alive, culminating in a demented ordeal in the game's final third, which will truly test even the most hardcore of platforming enthusiasts. The developer also released a free expansion recently, which is said to offer even harder trials, so there never was a better time to dive into this short and sweet Metroidvania gem than right now. As our final entry, we have a rare specimen from the co-op branch of the genre. Anima Flux had immediately caught my eye when I first saw its trailer due to its beautiful art style and dark science fiction theme, and I was glad to find out that the actual game did not disappoint when I finally got my hands on it during early October. Being able to play a whole game cooperatively with a friend is always a special treat, but being able to do so in a Metroidvania that is also really good is even rarer. That's not to say you can't have a ton of fun on your own, since you can instantly swap between characters if you're playing solo, though chances are you'll probably stick with the ranged combatant since the melee one is less fun to play. Anima Flux had great exploration and combat, mainly in the ranged department as previously mentioned, and exuded an 80s to 90s cartoon aesthetic that was very nostalgic to me and truly did wonders for the darker themes of the story. Its bosses were also a standout for me as well, presenting a healthy challenge without ever feeling unfair. If you're looking for a solid science fiction Metroidvania to play, or better yet if you want to play an entertaining cooperative adventure with a friend, look no further. And thus concludes our dive into what was, beyond the shadow of a doubt, an amazing year for Metroidvanias, and what many consider to be the absolute peak for the genre. That being said, I'm very curious to hear your very own top Metroidvania preferences, so please let me know in the comments below. Also, if you want to find a bunch of upcoming indie Metroidvania games you may not know about, feel free to watch the tens of videos I have available on my channel by clicking on the playlist you see in front of you right now. On a last note, if you like my content and wish to support the channel, please subscribe to it and kindly consider making a donation to my Ko-fi page, the link for which you can find in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time, Soulsborne Seeker out!